Hey, welcome to Mistake Man. Welcome back. This is the second video in my series of build videos on creating a gift box that was hopefully look like an engram from Destiny. Um, I put together this piece here just kind of as a proof of concept, and the clear plastic, I think that's going to work. I didn't care for the material on the inside was some of this cellophane-like material, right? That had kind of a yellowish, greenish tint to it that I didn't really care for. So I ordered in some other material that's similar. It's very similar, but it looks a little bit different. And so that has finally arrived. So let me show you that. So that's this stuff here. As you can see, it's very, very rainbow-ish. And in certain light and from certain angles, it mostly just looks clear. But then you get these reflections that are yellow, green, pink, blue, all sorts. It ends up looking pretty similar to the stuff I had before, but let me show you the roll that the other stuff came on. That is the reason I say it looked really yellow, right? So if you look at that roll, so that's the roll of this stuff that I showed you on the last video. I mean, that's very clearly a yellowish color once you put it all, many layers of it together like that. Whereas this stuff here doesn't quite have that same look. So it's still got yellow and green and blue and pink. The same colors are there, but they just reflect and transmit a little bit differently. So I went ahead and decided to go with this material, and I cut out pieces of it to line these inside faces of the shape. And while I was at it, I went ahead and added folds to get kind of like an accordion shape. So it'll come out and go back in, out, back in. And that just is to simulate those radiating concentric pentagons that go around there. And I like the effect. Let me see if I can get some good reflections from the light on that. As you can see, it has kind of gives it a linear look to it. And I think it looks good. I like it. So I'm going to go with that. And it's not perfect, right? They're not perfectly straight lines. There's some wrinkling that's going on in some of the spots, but I like that. That's actually a good thing, because if you look at the actual engram, it's got some just kind of random diamond-like facets going on inside. So I think that's going to help with that effect. So I like this. I think I've got a good direction to go. And I think I've got a good method for simulating the effects that I want. So the next step is to actually start cutting out and putting the final thing together. This is just a proof of concept. I was thinking I might be able to use this in the final because it's all the right size. But I wasn't too sure if I liked how hazy this plastic looks. You can kind of see through there. It's not terrible, but just a definite haziness to it. So, and I only had a few sheets of that. I just bought a few sheets to experiment with it, see if I liked it. I did order some different material, and that came in yesterday. And it looks like, and this came in 12 by 12 sheets instead of 8.5 by 11. That's got this tissue paper to protect it, but this is much clearer. There's hardly any hazing on that at all, hardly any cloudiness to it. So this stuff is really good. It's a slightly thinner material than what I had before. This stuff here, the slightly hazy stuff was 10 mil or 10 thousandths of an inch, where this stuff is 7 or 7.5. So it's slightly thinner, but I think it's still going to be stiff enough once I build these shapes out of it and glue it all together, that I think is going to be just fine. And where it is 12 by 12, I can actually get a little bit more, a few more pieces out of each sheet than I could with the 8.5 by 11. So it is possible to change the sheet size in Pepakura to be the 12 by 12 to match what I have in the clear plastic. And so I did that, and then I laid out the parts that I need to cut out of the clear plastic, and I was actually able to nest those nicely so that I get one example of each type of part onto a single 12 by 12 sheet. What I'll do is I'll print this out. I don't have any 12 by 12 copy paper, so I'll just print this out on an 8.5 by 11. I'll just scale it down to fit that, and that's okay because it's just a visual reference, a guide to help me remember how to lay these parts out on the plastic sheet, so that I can make sure I get all those pieces to fit nicely. So I've also made some notes to myself of how many of each one of these parts I need to cut out. And so 10 of each of these, and then 10 of this with the flap, and then 2 of those without the glue flaps. So I printed out this from Pepakura. I shrunk it down because the Pepakura sheet was 12 by 12. I shrunk this down to fit on an 8.5 by 11. This is just a reference for me, for me as I'm building it, just to help me see how those parts can be laid out on the 12 by 12 plastic to get the most material, the most parts per sheet. So, and then it's also, I made those notes where telling me how many of each piece I need to cut out. And then these are the actual templates I cut, the full size templates. So it'll be something like this. It's probably hard to see that clear plastic on the camera, but let's say I'll line up the top edge with the top of my cutting mat here, and then this edge I'll run right down on the edge of this, the outer edge of this darker square in the middle, just so you can kind of keep track of that as I lay them out. So I'll lay out this piece like this. This piece can go up in this corner. Right there. This one goes in this corner. And then this one goes there. So yeah, just enough room to fit them all on there. But also not so tight that I have to worry about overlapping it all. So there we go. The other edge is right about here. Oh, I shifted it a little bit. There we go. So it's right there on that line. So there we go. So what I've been doing, like what I've done for, I did build both of the halves of the black. The last video I just had one half done. I did build the other half just exactly identical to the first one, and then they'll just nest like that essentially once it's done. But there we go. I'm just going to start cutting out plastic pieces and start assembling it. I've got everything I need so far. At first I wasn't really going to show video of me actually doing any of this cutting out and building and stuff, but I did think that as I started doing this, I thought it might be useful. Some of you might have questions how I'm using these templates to help me cut out the shapes out of the plastic. So I decided to go ahead and film that so you can see what I'm doing. So I decided to just start with cutting out this large pentagon here, and so I grabbed that from my templates and I laid all of them out on here as you saw me show in the previous part of the video, I laid them out, so I knew that this was in the right spot. And then I went ahead and I just got a little bit of masking tape and just taped down on the 5 edges, just enough to hold it in place while I cut. And then I went ahead and pulled the rest of the pieces off. I'll, do each one individually as I go through. So the idea here is I'm not even going to do any marking. I'm just going to tape the template down in the spot that I want. And then I'll come through and I'll line up my straight edge along just till I can barely, not even, just till the edge just barely disappears. Then I know I've got it lined up. And then I'll just carefully hold down the ruler and then run the knife along. And with the plastic, it takes a couple passes. I don't want to push so hard that I push the ruler out of the way. So I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on there, too light to actually cut through the plastic. So I know I've got to go over it a few times, make sure it goes through. But I do have to be careful that I don't shift that ruler at all between slices, otherwise my edge will be messed up. Okay, I think that's good enough. Let's check. Yeah. All that's really holding it on is there's a bit of adhesive from that tape that's bridging the gap there. That's really the only place that it's not letting go. Yeah. Okay, so just a few passes with the knife is enough to keep that going. But you do have to be careful each time you go around, each edge you cut, you're cutting the piece of tape that's holding that on there. So by the time we get to the end, there's only going to be the one last piece of tape that's holding that on, and so that template will have a tendency to shift and twist if I put any kind of lateral pressure on it. So just keep that in mind as you're going along. Okay, so I've got the shape cut out, but I do need to also know where those bend lines are going to be. I can actually see, I don't know if you can see on camera, but I can see a little bit through, through the back of the paper, I can see where those bend lines are. So I might just score that bend line. Okay, there we go. That was a bit of a pain. I think what I'll probably do is before I actually make the cut, while the template's still taped to the paper, since I can see through that from the back, I'll just do what I did there before I cut it out. All right, so I've got this one cut out. Let's see if I can, how it's going to look when I add a bend to it. But anyway, so this stuff is different material than what I've been working with so far. So I don't know how it's going to bend. Hopefully it'll bend nicely without cracking. That's the one thing I am potentially concerned about is how does it bend? Am I going to be able to make tight enough bends without the material cracking? Actually going to go get another straight edge to help me bend that. I'll be right back. All right, so I've got a second straight edge. So I'll put this first one along that bend edge. It's a little difficult to see. And then I slide this one underneath like that. And then I can bend the whole tab all at once. I'm feeling along this edge here just to see if I can feel any sharp edges that you'd get if that actually started cracking and splitting along that bend, but it feels nice and smooth. So I think that's going to be just fine. I just need to, it just really doesn't want to, it's very elastic. It wants to just go right back to its shape before you bent it. So I'll have to work with that on some of these, but I think that's going to work. So I've made some progress on gluing stuff together. I've cut out enough of these parts for 1/2 of the Engram, and so I decided to start putting things together. I've started with this outer edge here, the seam where the two halves are going to close together, and you can kind of see there I had some back and forth and some decision making I had to do to as far as gluing these clear plastic pieces together. I was thinking that I was just going to use this E6000 for all of the clear plastic pieces because I had some success doing that on this little proof of concept here, and you can see, hopefully you can see there, you can see some bubbles and kind of ugliness in that first seam that I did there, but then for these other three, they look really good. Like there's hardly any of that nastiness there. So I was really happy with that. I was thinking I'd be able to do that throughout the whole Engram. But then once I started putting these together, I know, see if you can see that one there. The ugliness returned in spades. So yeah, it looks nasty. I don't like it. I just had a hard time keeping that seam together long enough while it dried and applying good enough pressure across that whole interface that it doesn't look good. I don't like it. So, and I think it's just because the difference is why it looked so good on this one but not on that is with this I was able to hold it against the table and apply lots of really good pressure, even pressure across that whole bond there. And that was the secret to the success on those. But for these joints, I can't do that. Without building some kind of a jig where I could apply good pressure across there, uh, I can't do that same thing. I could maybe use some clamp system, but again, I'd have to jig something up, and I don't really want to put that much work into this. So I toyed with a few other ideas. Sorry if that keeps making noise. I did some Googling and seeing what other people use to glue clear plastic. One of the suggestions was to use ultraviolet hardening resin, and I have some, so I was like, oh, sure, I'll give it a try, and it worked. It was pretty easy to get it on there without any bubbles, and it hardened well enough. It was a little messy, and but the main issue is that it just wasn't that strong of a bond. I was able to just take the two pieces that I resined together, and I was just able to peel those apart pretty easily. So it would be a shame to build this whole thing up and then have a seam on the inside come apart and not be able to fix that. So I decided to just, this was a backup. I could do that if I needed to. But I also decided to give the double-sided tape another try. There is double-sided tape that you can get that comes with like a thin backing, so you can peel it off the roll, place it on your joint, and then kind of rub the bubbles out of it before you pull that final backing off to glue the two pieces together. I wasn't able to find any of that. Well, all the ones that I found were like really thick. They're like 1/8 of an inch thick, 2 millimeter thick and it's like really strongly bonding stuff, mostly designed for like mounting things to the wall. So it was just way too thick for what I need, obviously. Um, I could order some stuff, but I decided I'd get some more of this kind of double-sided tape and just see if I could just be more careful about how I handle it. And that's what I've been doing here, and it actually, I think, is working pretty good. Um, so that's one of the joints that I did there. It's not perfect. There are some little tiny bubbles at the edges. Not too worried about those. There's also some kind of, put something black behind it. It seems to be easier to see. Um, there's kind of some kind of cloudiness. I don't know. I guess it's just like little tiny bubbles. But I mean, this is making it look on camera much worse than it actually looks in person. And so, I mean, that doesn't look that great. But in person, I think it's not too bad. Especially this one. Like that doesn't look bad at all. But all of them look way better than this nastiness with the glue. So I think I'm just gonna go with that. Like by the time I get all of this kind of cellophane rainbowy material in there, there's gonna be enough kind of flashy effects going on inside that I don't think that kind of little bit of haziness is actually going to even be noticeable, except to anyone except for me and you who know it's already know that it's there. So I think I'm going to go with that. I decided to go ahead and go with this. And what I'm doing is essentially just using tweezers to pull it off there, because as soon as I touch that stuff, I get fingerprints on it and it looks nasty. So I'm just using tweezers to pull it off, stretch it out to as long as I need to make that seam, and then I tear it off, and then I hold the piece, and I have another pair of tweezers here that I use to grab onto the other end of the strip, and then I carefully lay it across the seam and then close it up. And it's fiddly, it's not easy to do, but so far it's the easiest thing that I've found to do that doesn't look horrible once it's done. So yeah, so I went ahead and went all the way around on that. I'm starting on this bottom portion here. You can see I've got the first piece on there. I'm going to go that. What I am doing is gluing the plastic to the paper first, and then once all those pieces are there, so I'll have another one next to it here. Then these seams will be loose as I go all the way around, and then those are the seams that I'm going to put the double-sided tape on. So once I've gone all the way around, then I'll start working on those. I'll put some double-sided tape there, clamp that for just smooth out any of the large bubbles that I get. Move to the next one, keep going. Now for the joint from the plastic to the paper, I am still using the E6000 because it's a good strong bond, and I don't care if it's ugly in here because these seams are going to end up being covered by this rainbow stuff. So I don't care if those seams are ugly. I do get some the glue that kind of squeezes out at the seam here. That's not an issue. I'm not going to be able to see that, but on here on the inside, this face is going to be visible, right? So, but I do have blobs of glue that come out here. But that E6000, I don't wait for it to fully cure, but I wait for it to cure enough that it's the part's not pulling away from the paper. But once it's to that point, I can just grab it with the tweezers and peel it away, and it just tears right at that seam and leaves a nice clean edge. So there's only one of the edges that I waited a little bit too long, that when I try and pull that out, it actually kind of rips down and starts ripping the glue out from between the two pieces. So that one I just cleaned up as good as I could and left it. So I do have to time that about right. But like I said, it's wait for it to cure long enough that it doesn't come off the paper, but not so long that it's like kind of a harder rubbery feel. So yeah, that's just a quick update. All right, so I've put together all of the clear plastic pieces on this half of the Engram. It's getting big enough that it doesn't all fit in the frame. So anyway, that's what it looks like. The double-sided tape ended up working all right. It does, as you know, I was working around to attach more pieces. To get in to attach one, I'd have to be messing around with it, and it would put stress on some of the previous joints, and so some of them got a little bit more of the kind of crazing effect, and there's not much I can do about that. I'm just hoping that by the time I get all of the shiny rainbowy bits on the inside, that they'll just cover most of that. So I don't know. There's not much I can do about it at this point. I'm just gonna go with it. It is a little weird. Like I was hoping, like that once all these pieces got put together, especially with these pieces running in between, that would kind of uh, rigidify the structure, and it certainly has. But I mean, it's interesting to see what degrees of freedom it still has, you know. But I'm certain that when I get the actual final clear pieces, these outer pentagons glued on there, obviously none of this is going to be able to move around at that point. So I think that'll strengthen it up nicely. And one way that I can be sure of that is if I flip this over and rest all of those points against the table, if I just put a little bit of pressure down on that, then this thing is rock solid. There's nothing moving around. So I think that's going to be just fine. All right, so this is what I've got so far. I've got little sheets of the cellophane-like stuff, the rainbow material that's on 4 of these sides. I've just got 2 more to go there. But I did want to show you what I'm doing here. I think it's looking pretty good. I think once I get, the outer plastic sheets and then those rainbow cardstock pentagons in the middle, I think that's going to actually look pretty awesome. So let me show you what I'm doing here on the inside. I've got some pieces of template that I've got here that I printed out on copy paper. And I was originally cutting this out of multiple pieces. You can see there was, 2 pieces there and then 3 pieces there as separate, and there was a cut there. But this is all one giant sheet of that rainbow cellophane. So I've got a huge sheet of it. I can cut all that out as one piece rather than as separate pieces. So I went ahead and spliced those 2 templates together. And yeah, so I just laid out a big sheet of that, cut 6 of those out of that. And then what I do is I take that shape. You can see here's one that's already been fully prepared with the little accordion folds in it. So I'll take that shape and I'll fold it up. I essentially I haven't got any that are not prepared, so I can't show you the process, but I can show you what I did. So I just actually what I do is I line up the corners of each of those along one of the lines of my cutting mat. And then, I'll lay my straight edge against that and just fold it up and over. And then I also kind of just tend to try and make the edges line up. That way I know I've got a good, the edges right there. And then I'll just pull that out and then run my finger along that to crease that edge. And then I'll do it on the next one, then the next one. After I got them all together, then what I actually did was I kind of rolled it up like this. So I ended up with just a wedge shape like that. And you can see here's one here that I haven't unfolded after this. So I rolled it up into just one wedge shape, and then I laid that edge shape against my edges here. Just use the markings on my cutting mat, and I lined up the short edge against one of the lines, set the straight edge over it. It's kind of hard to show against this one that I've already done, but essentially laid that edge there. And then these are marked. These marks are every 1/4 inch. And that ended up being about right for this width. And so I just decided to use that. So I lined up the short edge against one of the marks, lined up the straight edge on the next mark that's a 1/4 inch over from there, folded it over, pulled the straight edge away, and then creased the fold. And then in order to make it an accordion shape, I just flipped it over, lined it up again, lined up the straight edge, folded it, creased it, flipped it over, and then repeated all the way up until I end up with, you can see the accordion pattern there. So, and then I just unroll that and end up with this. And then I just go over it with a cloth to kind of clean up any of my fingerprints, because the next step is to actually install it. And then what I've been doing to install it is I clean up the fingerprints on the clear plastic here, because there are a lot of them. And then I set this inside, and then I just work from one of these cut edges. I'm going to say glue, but I'm not actually using glue. I'm using this UV curing resin, ultraviolet curing resin. So I'll put a little drop of that on the back face of that little corner there. I'll put it in, hold it in place, and then I'll just shoot the back of it with some UV light for just a few seconds, long enough for it to grip. And then I can let it go and it won't move. And then I come around to the front and then zap it with the UV for, I don't know, a minute. And then it's just a tiny amount of it, so it cures rather quickly. But then once I've got that corner in, then I'll do the top corner on that edge. Do the same thing, just put a drop of it on there, hold it against, zap it, and then work my way around. On these ones, on these ones where it's a crease between two different segments, I'll put a drop on both portions of it. So on this portion of the corner and then across on the opposite. But I'll always do the inside one first, do both of those, hold it and cure it, and then I'll just kind of fold this back a little bit so I can get access to the back, put a drop there and a drop there, and then hold it and cure it, and then do the same thing all the way around, do inside first, then outside. And it's working pretty good, I think. I mean, if you look closely, you can see the edges of the resin, as you know, because it just kind of spreads out depending on how much I put on there and how much pressure you put on the joint. It'll just spread out in random directions, so you just get irregular little blob shapes in there. But it cures so clear that it's really not. Honestly, it doesn't really stand out against all the other little, random wrinkly faceting of the shiny bits on the inside. So as long as I'm careful and the resin doesn't like squeeze out the side and then come around to the front, because then usually it'll like leave an imprint of the texture of these gloves on there, and then it's not quite as clear. So as long as I'm careful not to do that, which that's only happened once on all these joints, then it turns out looking just fine. So yeah, I'm just wearing one glove and one ungloved hand, just because it's helping me keep the fingerprints off of the stuff that I'm working on. After I've cleaned the fingerprints off, I don't want to put any more back on, but I still like to have the dexterity of an ungloved hand. So anyway, so that's how it's looking. I think it's, like I said, I think it's looking pretty good, especially once I get these in there. So it'll look something like that. It's hard to get those to stay in without sliding out, but I'll drop them in just so you can get a sense for what that might look like when it's done. So yeah, it's got those nice radiating lines from certain angles. Got lots of different rainbow colors going on. So yeah, I'm liking the effect so far. So there is one half of the Engram done, basically, or at least as done as I'm going to take it at this point. I added the rainbow cardstock pentagons to the inside of each of those. And I started off using the E6000 on this first one here, but I don't know if you can see that. It actually made a little indentation of where I added the glue. So I added the glue, just kind of set back in from this edge a little ways in a pentagon all the way around. And then I just kind of made a star shape across the middle. And I was surprised that it would do that. I did not expect that. You can see a little depression there, so not happy with that. But so I decided not to do that on the rest of them. I decided to just use CA glue on those, and that worked okay. I mean, it didn't leave any depressions like it did with the other stuff. And I didn't put as much on. I just put basically a dot there, just again set back in from the outer edge a little ways, a dot there, and then one in the middle of the edge. One in each corner and one in the middle of each edge, and then just one right in the center of the piece. And I don't see any warping due to those glue spots. But anyway, that's, like I said, essentially that's it. I will, of course, need to also put those large clear outer pentagons on, but I'm going to save that for the very end once I've got everything together, just to make sure everything's going to fit together nicely. So yeah, there it is. So that's it for this video. I will go ahead and build the other half. That's going to be exactly the same as this, so I'm not really going to film any of that unless I run into something interesting. But then, yeah, so in the next video, I'll have two of these halves. I will add a hinge so that they can open up like a clamshell box. And then last step will be placing those outer pentagons on, and we'll be done. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.